The blade sang through the air with a sound no one had ever heard before, a whisper that could split souls. In the firelit forge of 8th century Japan, a man stood trembling, not from fear, but from the terrible realization of what he had just created. His name was Amakuni, and the weapon in his hands would change warfare forever. But this story doesn't begin with triumph. It begins with shame so profound that it drove a master swordsmith to the edge of madness. The year was 700 AD, and Emperor Monmu's army had just returned from battle against rebels in the northern provinces. Amakuni, the imperial swordsmith, stood with his son Amakura outside their forge as the warriors marched past. For generations, Amakuni's family had crafted the straight swords called Chokoto reliable blades, modelled after Chinese designs that had served samurai for centuries. As the soldiers filed by, Amakuni waited for the customary nods of gratitude, the acknowledgement that his swords had protected them in combat. But something was wrong. Warrior after warrior passed without meeting his eyes. Their faces were grim, splattered with mud and blood. Then Amakuni noticed something that made his stomach drop. Nearly half the soldiers carried swords that were bent or broken. Blades snapped at the tang, edges chipped beyond repair. These weren't the marks of victory. These were the marks of failure. His failure. The emperor himself rode past on a white horse, and for the first time in Amakuni's life the ruler didn't acknowledge him. The silence was deafening. Amakuni felt his life's work crumble in that moment. Every sword he'd ever forged, every technique passed down through 7 generations, all of it inadequate. That night Amakuni couldn't sleep. His son found him in the forge, staring at the failed blades the army had left behind. "Father, perhaps the warriors simply fought too hard. No blade can withstand—" "No," Amakuni's voice was hollow. "A sword should never fail its master. If it does, the failure belongs to the smith, not the warrior." He picked up one of the broken swords, examining the straight blade. "These swords are wrong. They've always been wrong. We've been making the same mistake for 300 years. Amakura had never seen his father like this, obsessed, almost feverish. "What do you mean?" Amakuni grabbed a piece of charcoal and began sketching on the forge wall. "Look at how a warrior fights. The Chinese slash in straight lines. Their swords are designed for their techniques, but our samurai, they cut in arcs. They draw the blade across the target. A straight sword fights against this natural motion. The blade needs to curve with the cut, not against it." "But father, no one has ever made a curved sword. The metal will be weaker at the bend." "Not if we forge it differently." Amakuni's eyes gleamed in the firelight. "Not if we fold the steel itself into something new." What followed was a year of isolation that became legend. Amakuni and Amakura locked themselves in the forge, refusing visitors, barely eating. The sounds that emerged, the ringing of hammers, the roar of flames, the hiss of water came at all hours. Villagers whispered that the swordsmith had gone mad, that he was trying to forge a blade from moonlight and obsession. The truth was far more methodical, though no less obsessive. Amakuni had discovered something that European smiths wouldn't understand for another 1,000 years. The secret was in the steel itself, in the marriage of hard and soft metal. He began with Tamahagan jewel steel, made from iron sand heated for days in a clay furnace. But instead of using it as previous smiths had, Amakuni separated the steel by carbon content. The harder, high-carbon steel he called Kawagana skin steel. The softer, low-carbon steel became Shingane heart steel. His innovation was revolutionary. Create a core of flexible, shock-absorbent soft steel, then jacket it with a skin of hard steel that could hold a razor edge. The combination would give the blade both strength and flexibility, the ability to bend under stress without breaking, yet cut through armor without dulling. But forging these two types of steel together was only the beginning. Amakuni folded the metal, repeatedly heating, hammering, folding up to 16 times. Each fold doubled the layers, creating thousands of microscopically thin sheets of alternating hard and soft steel. The technique required perfect temperature control. Too hot, and the carbon would burn away. Too cold, and the layers wouldn't bond. His son watched as Amakuni rejected blade after blade. "Father, this one seems perfect." Amakuni struck it against the anvil and it snapped. "The layers aren't bonding correctly. The heart is too hard, or the skin too soft." Again. Months passed. Amakuni experimented with different clay coatings, applying thick clay to the spine of the blade and thin clay to the edge before heating. When he plunged the glowing blade into water, the edge protected by less clay cooled faster than the spine, creating different crystal structures in the steel. The edge became incredibly hard martensite, while the spine remained flexible pearlite. This differential hardening caused something unexpected and beautiful. The blade curved naturally as it cooled. The harder edge contracted more than the softer spine, pulling the entire blade into an elegant arc. It was as if the sword was shaping itself, guided by the very laws of metallurgy. But Amakuni wasn't satisfied with just the metallurgy. He obsessed over every detail. The curve had to be perfect too much, and the blade would be weak in the thrust, too little, and it wouldn't cut efficiently. He experimented with the kisaki, the point making it more acute than the blunt tips of chakuto. He refined the yokote, the line dividing the point from the blade, creating a reinforced tip that could pierce armor. The handle became another innovation. Instead of the rigid handles of straight swords, Amakuni created a longer suka wrapped in rayskin and silk cord, allowing for two-handed grips and giving the warrior better leverage for those arsing cuts. He designed the suba, the guard, not just for hand protection, but as a counterweight that balanced the blade perfectly. After a year of failure, breakthrough, and refinement, Amakuni held the blade he knew was ready. It was approximately 70 centimeters long, curved like a whisper, with a mirror-polished surface that revealed the hamen, the beautiful undulating line where hard edge met soft spine, visible proof of the differential hardening. The blade seemed alive, organic, as if it had grown rather than been forged. He named it simply katana, meaning side blade, referring to how it was worn edge up through the belt, ready for instant draw and cut in a single motion, the technique that would become ya-ijutsu. When Emperor Monmu visited the forge, he found Amakuni aged beyond his years, his hands scarred, his eyes carrying the weight of obsession fulfilled. Amakuni presented the sword in silence, then performed something no one had seen before. In one fluid motion, he drew the katana from its sire, scabbard, cutting through a rolled bamboo mat, the equivalent of human flesh and bone, in a single strike, then returned the blade to its scabbard. The entire movement took less than 2 seconds. The bamboo fell in 2 pieces so cleanly cut that they seemed to simply come apart, as if they had never been whole. The emperor reached for the blade, and Amakuni handed it to him with both hands, a gesture of respect that would become tradition. As Monmu examined the weapon, he saw his reflection in the polished steel, distorted and perfected by the curve. He felt the perfect balance, the way the sword seemed to float in his hands despite its weight. "This is not the same weapon," the emperor said quietly. "No, your majesty, this is the sword your warriors deserved. This is the sword I should have made years ago." The emperor tested the blade against one of the old straight swords, striking them together. The chokuto blade chipped. The katana's edge remained perfect, unmarred. He swung both swords through the air, feeling how the katana moved with his body's natural motion, while the straight sword fought against it. "You have created something unprecedented, Amakuni. This is not merely a better sword. This is a new philosophy of the blade." News of the revolutionary sword spread through Japan like wildfire. Swordsmith families from across the islands made pilgrimages to study Amakuni's techniques. But creating a true katana wasn't something that could be learned quickly. It required years of mastery, an understanding of metallurgy that bordered on alchemy, and an obsessive attention to detail that most smiths didn't possess. The katana's impact on warfare was immediate and profound. Samurai who wielded them discovered they could cut through the armor and weapons of enemies still using old straight swords. The curved blade's cutting power came from its design. The art concentrated force along the edge, while the differential hardening meant the blade could flex under impact without breaking. Warriors could strike with full force, knowing their weapon wouldn't betray them. But the katana became more than a weapon. It became the soul of the samurai, the physical manifestation of Bushido, the way of the warrior, the painstaking process of forging a katana, the purification of materials, the folding of steel, the clay coating, the differential hardening mirrored the samurai's own spiritual refinement. Just as the sword was tested and folded and refined through fire and water, so too was the warrior's spirit. Swordsmiths became artists and priests, and the forging of a katana became a sacred ritual. They would purify themselves before beginning work, hang sacred ropes around the forge, and pray to the Shinto gods of metalworking. The creation of a katana could take months, with the smith working alone or with a single apprentice, maintaining absolute focus and purity of purpose. Each katana was unique, bearing the signature of its creator in the nakago, the tang hidden within the handle. The blade's personality revealed itself in subtle details: the pattern of the hamon, the grain of the steel visible in the hada, the precise degree of curve in the sori. Connoisseurs could identify not just the smith, but the specific period in that smith's career when a blade was forged, reading the steel like a biography written in metal. The katana evolved over centuries into different styles, optimized for different purposes. The tachi was worn edge down and used by cavalry. The uchigatana was shorter and worn edge up for faster drawing. The wakizashi served as a companion sword. But all descended from Amakuni's original innovation, that revolutionary marriage of hard and soft steel, that perfect curve born from differential hardening. Yet despite all the refinements and variations, the fundamental principles Amakuni discovered in his year of obsessive forging remained unchanged for over 1,000 years. Modern metallurgists, studying ancient katanas with electron microscopes, are still amazed by the sophistication of the steel structure. The blades contain millions of microscopic layers, complex crystal formations, and a hardness differential that modern industrial processes struggle to replicate. Amakuni lived to see his swords carried by the emperor's elite guard, but he never took another commission. His son and subsequent generations of his line continued the craft, but Amakuni himself retired to a small shrine he built near his forge. Visitors who came seeking wisdom found him meditating before a simple altar, holding not a sword, but the first broken blade that had shamed him, a reminder that failure, not success, had been his greatest teacher. The last recorded words of Amakuni, spoken to a young smith seeking to learn the secrets of the katana, were these: "The sword is not born in fire and water. It is born in the smith's willingness to begin again, to reject what is merely good in pursuit of what is perfect. Every fold of the steel is an opportunity to give up or to continue. The blade that never breaks is forged by the spirit that refused to break. That is the secret. There is no other." When Amakuni died at the age of 73, his funeral procession was attended by hundreds of samurai, each carrying a katana forged by his descendants. They struck their swords together in salute, and the sound, that distinctive ring of perfectly forged steel, echoed through the valley where he had spent that year of isolation, transforming failure into a legacy that would last a millennium. Today, the katana remains one of the most sophisticated examples of pre-industrial metallurgy ever created. Museums display ancient blades that are still razor-sharp after 800 years. The folded steel structure, the differential hardening, the perfect curve. These innovations that Amakuni developed through obsessive trial and error represented an understanding of material science that was centuries ahead of its time. But perhaps more remarkable than the technical achievement was the cultural impact. the katana became the symbol of an entire civilization's values: honor, discipline, precision, and the pursuit of perfection through endless refinement. The sword that Amakuni forged in shame became the weapon that defined the samurai, shaped Japanese history, and created an artistic tradition that continues to this day. In modern Japan, there are still swordsmiths who practice the traditional methods, following techniques that have been passed down through generations, ultimately traceable back to that year when one smith refused to accept failure. They still fold the steel, still apply the clay coating in precise patterns, still achieve differential hardening through careful temperature control. The process takes months, and each blade is a unique work of art worth tens of thousands of dollars, and every one of those modern smiths knows the story of Amakuni, the man who was shamed by broken swords and who responded not with excuses but with revolution. The man who looked at 300 years of tradition and said, "This is wrong," then spent a year in isolation proving himself right. The man who transformed the sword from a simple tool of war into an object of transcendent beauty and functionality. The first man who forged the katana didn't just create a new weapon. He created a new standard for what a weapon could be, a perfect fusion of art and science, beauty and lethality, tradition and innovation. He proved that true mastery comes not from following the path laid by others, but from having the courage to forge a new path when the old one leads to failure. And that, perhaps, is the real legacy of Amakuni. Not just the blade that changed warfare, but the spirit that refuses to accept mediocrity, that sees failure as an invitation to transcendence, that understands perfection is not a destination, but an endless journey of refinement. The katana's song, that distinctive whisper as it cuts through air, is the sound of that legacy, echoing across 13 centuries,